Welcome, everyone. Good evening and welcome to the Aspen Institute's Hurst Lecture Series program. I'm Crystal Logan, Vice President of Aspen Community Programs and Engagement, and I'm delighted that you've all chosen to join us this evening. First, our gratitude goes to Bob and Soledad Hurst and the Hurst Family Foundation for their generous support of this program. Thank you. Our guest, this music is really lovely, but maybe maybe it's time for that to go away. Our guest speaker, David Gergen, has been a leader in the public arena for more than 5 decades. He has served as a key White House advisor to 4 U.S. presidents, Republicans Nixon, Ford, and Reagan, and Democrat Bill Clinton. For the past 20 years, he's served as a professor of public service and founding director of the Center for Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School. David serves as senior political analyst for CNN, where he's a respected voice on national and international issues. We've been fortunate to have David on our board as a trustee for many years and now a lifetime trustee. His new book, Hearts Touched with Fire, How Great Leaders Are Made, was published in May of this year and is available for sale in the lobby, and he'll be available for signing after the conversation concludes. We're fortunate to have our president and CEO, Dan Porterfield, as our moderator this evening. Please join me in welcoming David Gergen and Dan Porterfield. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystal, and thanks to all for being here. We have lots of friends, trustees, and supporters of the Aspen Institute in the room. Supporter number 1, David Gergen, lifetime trustee. Both of his children involved in the Aspen Institute as fellows, completely different from all the things you've done. And let me start with a question of the audience. How many people in here have ever seen David Gergen on TV? All right. Truly a man who needed no introduction, but you got one anyway. This book, this book was a great read. I really highly recommend it. Incredibly coherent and thoughtful, years of experience, as well as study to go into it, told in such an engaging style. So you said in it that you wrote the book inspired by a theme of Erik Erikson's Generativity. Maybe as a way of starting, will you tell the audience, what does this mean that you wrote from the spirit of generativity? What were you trying to accomplish with this book?
Well, sure, thank you. Thank you, Dan, very much for being here. I must tell you, when you first came here and then we went through the last period, I thought, there is no way, it's impossible to do as well as Walter Isaacson did in this job and produce. And here you came along and you had both, Walter leaving, which makes it's a challenge, but you also had COVID, and you handled all of it really well. Your staff loves you, and so I just want to congratulate you on your own service here.
Thank you.
I'm a little surprised to be asked to give a talk at such a prestigious place for so long. I'm increasingly moving toward that stage where an old fellow was walking through the woods one day and he heard this sound. He couldn't hear it. They couldn't see anything. Then he kept walking. And then he heard it again and looked down, and there was a frog by the side of the path. And the frog looked up at him and said, if you kiss me, I'll turn into a beautiful princess. He said, wow, that's right, let's go. Reached down, picks up the frog, puts it in his pocket, no kiss. Crawls up, and the frog crawls up his jacket. Didn't you hear me? I said, if you kiss me, I'll turn into a beautiful princess. Yeah, at my age, I'd rather have a talking frog. That's sort of where I am in life. With the talking frog stage. Now, generativity comes into this. Erik Erikson was a famous educator, psychologist, and had an inspired following for many years. But he wrote about the stages of life. And I think, as I recall, he had 7 stages of life. And his argument was, you pass through each stage, and unless you get through that stage, you're handicapped for life. So you need to deal with each stage as you go. The 7th stage is really critical. It's the generativity stage. And what he is arguing is that when you're older and you're in that stage, that is the time you should be thinking seriously about giving back, what difference you can make, what your legacy is going to be, what your imprint in the sands of time will be. And that can move you with a sense of moral purpose. And so it's very much that generativity is tied to the success of succeeding generations too. And that's important because throughout the book, and what I would argue here tonight is that for a long, long time, the notion of generations themselves didn't really matter very much to history, because if your grandfather was a farmer, it's likely your dad was a farmer, it's likely and you were a farmer, and so on. But it was in the 19th century especially that Henry James, for example, argued the case, no, things have sped up. And now different generations are defined, not as broadly, but they're defined in generational terms. So you have the World War II generation, for example, and you have the baby boomers, and now you have what's going to happen, whatever's going to happen with this next generation with the millennials. We'll wait and see. But the notion is very strongly that you're defined, your generation is often largely defined with what happens to you in your generation when you're in your early 20s and early 30s. That period of time is very deformative. It's very formative. It's defining. And so the generativity argument bleeds into this argument about the generational aspect of this is where moral purpose is worked out in a society. So we'll talk more about that, but that's the general approach on generativity.
Well, I think it was so interesting that clearly the book was written in part, probably informed also by your experience at Harvard, for readers who are earlier in their life journey.
Yes.
And approaching those defining moments of the 30s and the 20s and early 30s in terms of the leadership journey. But you don't just give those readers advice, you write about them as well. You cover Malawi, you cover the group of survivors from the shooting in Florida, you cover Greta as an example of younger leaders already making a mark. And so let me ask you about that. As you were writing to younger readers, you also are writing about them. And why did you choose to do it that way?
Well, I thought it was of more relevance to the crowd that I was trying to reach. I wanted the book to be read by people of all generations and all, but I was especially aimed at the younger generation that's coming up. I had the privilege of working for 4 White Houses, as you heard a moment ago. And I think we can argue about how good the presidents were or weren't good. I take a lot of responsibility for mistakes we made. But nonetheless, I felt it was very, very important to reach that younger generation because I was increasingly disappointed with the older generation. And during the 90s, when things turned bad, that's when it really started in the early 90s, I became disappointed and felt the generation that's here now, the baby boom generation, has many fine individuals within that generation. There are people who have done wonderful things in life, but as a whole, if you look at that generation, it's been a disappointment, a severe disappointment. And that generation is beginning to leave the stage with the things in a real mess. And that's in contrast to what preceded the World War II generation. So when I was called by Harvard and said, would you like to, by Joe Nye, who is like, you all know him from his frequent appearances out here at Aspen. But Joe is a deep friend, and he called me and said, why don't you come to Harvard? And I thought, this is a chance to get beyond the bubble of Washington, D.C., and see if I can have some impact or engage in a conversation about the future, about the younger generation. I'd rather spend my time now talking to the younger generation than talking to the older generation, because I think there's more potential impact, that you potentially can have more impact. I think ultimately what we'd like to do is see alliances among the young and the old, so that you would join up in terms of having purpose.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you are thinking about the leadership opportunity for the young,
yeah,
and then also some of the different leadership styles,
right,
of the young. So they're already starting to make their imprint.
Sure.
And influencing you, who's older, who's thought about leadership your entire life. I found that so powerful in the way you framed it. And I guess I would ask you for the audience to position, if you will, some of the leadership styles and strategies and identities that you're celebrating today in comparison with, say, great man theory of leadership?
Yeah, well, I do think that one aspect of leadership that has changed, various things in leadership have changed now over the years, and that is you have to be much more broadly based today than you used to have to be. You've got to be more adaptive because the world is changing so rapidly. If you're in a leadership position, you have to be able to move and adapt to what you're seeing. That's really, really critical. Well, it's also true that for a long, long time, through much of history, there was a view that history has changed for the better, leadership is exercised for the better, when it's a great man who emerges upon the scene, if somebody comes in on a white horse and rescues us from all our perfidy. And that there is a lot to be said for that perspective, and it is one that is, I think, we'll talk about, but the alternative is to recognize that given how complex and changing the world is, and that you cannot do it alone as a great man, as much as you might like to. The head of the Gates Foundation, Patty Stonecipher, the first one, she's been out of that, spent a lot. She used to quote an African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's been proven time and time again in the world in which we're now living, with people who understand how to build teams, people who understand how to work beyond the boundaries of their own organization and form alliances, coalitions, that becomes very, very important to progress. And I think there are two photographs that are memorable to show the difference. The one is of Jack Kennedy at dusk in the Oval Office alone, sort of hunched over what looks like a globe. And he's all by himself. And the overall story, the overwhelming story is, here's a man with the entire burden of leadership for the world by himself. He has to do it. Whereas look at Obama, and when they were chasing down his, the madman, the picture from Obama is not Obama alone in the Oval Office. It's Obama down in the Situation Room, surrounded by his Secretary of State, his Secretary of Defense, his CIA director, his NSC director, like there's 7 or 8 people around. And you realize this is a team. And the success of the team is what matters. Yes, we still need individuals with great character. We still need individuals who command respect. But in order to get these big things done that need to be done these days, we've got to be able to operate in a bigger universe with getting beyond an individual.
And you have a section a little bit later in the book, maybe we'll come to, where you talk about great groups. What are the qualities and composition of great groups? But before we go there, let me ask you about the title from Oliver Wendell Holmes, Hearts Touched with Fire.
I loved it. Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. was the son of a very, very prominent doctor in Boston, and his mom was a very prominent figure as well. And the Holmes whole family has long been remembered with almost reverence around the Harvard Law School. At any event, during the Civil War, Holmes was about 21, 22, and he had an opportunity. When Lincoln issued his first call for volunteers, Holmes had an opportunity to pay his way out of it. That's what his father did. That's what Teddy Roosevelt's father did. He bought a ticket out from serving in the Civil War. Well, Holmes could have done the same thing and escaped any kind of danger. Instead, he volunteered. First thing he did, 23 years old, boom, he volunteered. What happened? And in successive times, he had 3 major injuries, 3 major times when he went down. And the last time when he was wounded, he was left behind on the battlefield because nobody thought he could live. And miraculously, he survived. 20 years later, on Memorial Day, he gives a talk about what the Civil War and serving as a volunteer in the Civil War meant to his generation. And what he said was, basically, we were honored. We had the good fortune to serve during the time of the Civil War when everybody was getting killed, because life is about passion. And life is about reaching for things and building a new world. And you've got to be willing to take some chances. We took the chances, and we were honored to do it because our hearts were touched with fire. Our hearts were touched with fire. I love that book. Yeah.
So this book is brilliantly constructed. And then you talk about some leaders that we can all connect to, whose hearts were touched by fire. And it was John McCain, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and John Lewis. Each of them as young people forged in that same moment of passion.
Yes.
Although different in some ways, what do you think they have in common?
Oh, I think that they did have a passion. I think that they were extremely dedicated people. I think that they were ruled by their hearts much more than by their minds. You know, there was something that they had a sense of motivation. That if you look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when her husband, she's in law school, she's doing very, very well. She's like #1 in her class. Her husband is diagnosed with cancer. She continues to go to law school while also doing his homework, getting all the notes, and she put everything together. Her mother's in trouble. She has to do all of this and yet still emerge, and she comes out of law school #1 in her class. But she did it in a miraculous way. And in those days, she couldn't get a job. You know, it was also that was also true of other women who were coming through in those days, but Ruth couldn't get a job. John McCain was the son of two 4-star admirals, the son and the grandson. And very importantly, he was a roustabout. For the most part, he had a heck of a lot of friends. He darn near flunked out of the Naval Academy. But when the times were tough, when he became a POW, and our American soldiers in that war were held as POWs longer than any other war in the nation's history. And McCain went in there and brought people together. He and a fellow named Jim Stockdale, who was down in a prison cell not far away. They both endured a huge amount of torture. They were just subjected to the worst things. But there's a wonderful passage in poetry. Henley, he's a figure in Victorian England, and he writes about that. About being captain of your own soul. It's a really lovely stanza. And McCain had that. And John Lewis, of course. And I wanted to find people who represented the diversity of the country, because I think it says we're all in this together. Yeah. And people of all backgrounds can be really helpful. Who would have ever thought that John Lewis, who came out of a huge amount of poverty, going back generations, who would have ever thought that he would become the John Lewis that we now, we practically worship today. And there are some funny passages in Lewis's memoir. When he was young, he used to take care of the chickens in the back of the house. And there was a little chicken coop back there. And he wanted to learn how to be a preacher. So he'd get the chickens out of the coops, and he'd put them in front of, and he would preach to the chickens and deliver his sermons. And he liked to also baptize them. So he took a couple of chickens and went down and baptized, and he said, "Oh my God, my chicken died." He died down there in the water. And when he brought the chicken out, it was absolutely still, and Lewis went crazy. And finally, they resuscitated the chicken, and he went on in life. But he was just I knew all three of these people, and they were wonderful Americans. They were just really terrific people.
Well, you told the stories beautifully and connected themes running across. I will get to the nature of the leader, what you call the inner journey, the outer journey, the action stage. But before we do that, these four figures, counting Holmes now, the incredible impact on our nation and on the culture and sensibilities that we who were fortunate enough to be exposed to them then formed for ourselves. They all were serving the country.
Yes.
And you're a passionate supporter of public service, community service.
Yeah.
Say a word about the opportunity in front of us as a country if we can mobilize more people to community service.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that I've had a chance over the last 20 years to have a lot of these young people pass through my classrooms. And so I've watched over time, and my experience has been that the quality of young people coming through our universities today is actually better than it was 20 years ago. And it's encouraging at a time when we're all so frustrated and sort of sometimes feel defeated. I think there is hope on the horizon. There are signs of hope on the horizon. I am now become a short-term pessimist. I think the next months and years are going to be really rough. short-term pessimist, but increasingly I'm a long-term optimist. I think we have a chance with the quality of the young people who are coming along, many of them your sons and daughters, maybe your grandchildren. I just think that they are bringing to the table a kind of commitment to change that we haven't seen since the World War II generation left the stage. They're serious. This is not all of them. You know, some young people are so discouraged because it's so hard to get change that they're sort of turning their backs on it. But other young people are sticking to it, and I think there's a whole group of people coming in internationally that can inspire us here at home, just as I think we can inspire others. But if you look at Greta Thunberg at 15 years old, just carrying a sign out in front of the Swedish Parliament, and that mobilizes a country, it was unbelievable. Or you think about Malala in Pakistan, and I've got to know each one of these people. Malala is a wonderful young woman. She comes to Boston to get a lot of surgery. She's still like 16th or 17th surgery, but you know, she was crusading for educating young women in Pakistan, and the Taliban was not willing to agree to that. So she was on a school bus one day, and the Taliban stopped the bus, got on the bus and said, "Which one is Malala?" And nobody said anything, then they figured it out. So they shot her 3 times in the head. Point blank shot her in the head. And she survived. She never woke up until they got her into England somewhere to a hospital there. But she became a miraculously interesting person who the Taliban is still after, and she's gone back there after getting her Nobel Prize, and she is once again crusading for young girls, and at great danger to herself. Well, those young people had an influence here in this country, and vice versa. The Parkland kids, you know, David Hogg and some of the other Parkland kids, they were inspired. They were inspired by what happened with Malala, but she was very, very. Greta Thunberg was very, very captivated by David Hogg and that group, the Parkland group, because she had been out there with a single sign. And now she saw the Parkland group, they organized a big group going to the team versus great man theory. She started organizing a bigger and bigger group, and it worked. And it remains I think a mainstay. But I would also say that we are now seeing people on this side of the oceans, young people who are stepping forward in ways that we ought to be very proud of and accept and understand. One of the things that's happening is a lot of the young people who are the most interesting people coming along happen to be black women. The black women have increasingly seized the high moral ground in our national discourse. And so, you know, there is much that they're doing, you know, whether it's the Me Too movement or the Black Lives Matter movement, or whether you see it in Stacey Abrams down in Georgia, when you see example after example, there are a lot of young black women who are putting themselves out there. I don't happen to share the politics of AOC. She's to the left of me by some distance. And I don't share a lot of the political views of some of the other women. But I salute to the rooftops these young women for getting in the arena and calling it out as they see it. That is a vibrant democracy, when you can have arguments by people underneath that. And so what? You know, in the 60s and 70s, a lot of people used to say, oh, they're so far left, you know, they're impossible, they're socialists, they're communists, whatever the heck it was. It turned out they had a lot of good ideas that have now taken hold, are now part of our, and people had to fight to get gay rights honored in this country. But now it's happened. So progress is possible with the generation that's coming up, and I do think they're going to challenge the country. And you already see it, that in a lot of the pushback now, what we see now increasingly is our young people standing up and saying, no, we're not going to live this way continually. It's just unacceptable. And I think that's going to help to change the country. I think it's going to help to change the world. So, but I just want to make, if I can, I'm sort of gassing on here a little. But I would make one last point, because I want to make sure I have a chance to address it here. We have a lot of young people coming forward now who are very promising. There are hundreds upon hundreds who are doing this. But increasingly, we're falling way short in having the kind of personnel, the kind of numbers of people we need, just not hundreds upon hundreds, we need thousands upon thousands to do this, to make this a mass movement and to change our politics. It can be done, but it takes something more. I'm increasingly of the view, and I'm far from alone on this, that it's time to have a serious program of national service. We're not going to get there with just a small coterie. We're going to get there through something that's much bigger, and people are committed. And it can work very well. Now, it doesn't mean, Martin Luther King Jr. made it clear, you don't have had to go into elite universities or elite institutions to make a difference, to serve. He said, what matters is what's in your soul. What matters is what's in your soul. How helpful that is in terms of thinking about putting together a national service program. What do we mean by a national service program? Essentially, the core idea, and it is subject to a lot of change, obviously, the core idea is that we encourage every young person between the ages of 18 and 24 to give a year back to their communities, working in projects, whether it's in schoolhouses or in hospitals, or working as in climate change. There are a lot of things that need to be done there, can be done by young people without taking everything away from the unions and everything like that. You can put this together so that if a person serves for a year, they get a year off their tuition debt. If they serve a couple of years, you get 2 years off. It's a way to earn your way back. And I do think there's something to be said for some service to get your college loans repaid. I think it's not healthy to say, we're going to shower you with money.
Yeah.
What we want is for people in their 40s to say, what did you do in your year of service? How did you spend your year of service? As if that's something that is honored. And we have proven that people in military uniforms can command the respect of the country. We need a situation in which people in domestic clothing can have the same honor and the same kind of command the same kind of respect that military people do. In both instances, you're doing it for the country's sake. So it can be done. It's not that expensive. And I can just tell you, there are a lot of young people out there who are looking for opportunities and they don't know how to do it. And one of the things that's been good about what Aspen has been doing is building up these fellowship programs and recognizing that Aspen and the Institute can play a significant role in preparing the next generation. You know, a lot of this expansion of fellowships and everything like that, that's exactly what it goes to. But it's being recognized in other major universities too. Stanford, for example, has raised $750 million. $750 million for what's called the Knight Hennessy program.
Yeah.
And Phil Knight was Nike, and Hennessy was the president of Stanford. He retired to go run this program. And it's a program for building up the leadership capacities of the young. Now, the Yale Law School, we could hear more from one of our sponsors here tonight, from the Yale Law School. The Yale Law School has now established a program for leadership development because there are a lot of their graduates are no longer going to practice law. They wind up in other things, and we need to get them sort of prepped up. So at Harvard, we've started a program that I've been intimately involved with, and we've had about 1,000 students come through now who've done so with fellowships. They never could have come to Harvard without that. But you can see this, and some of the HBCU colleges and universities now are seeing this kind of effort to support and build up leadership. I think we ought to be building up the leadership and also asking people to serve.
So one of the things that I love about your understanding of the value of service is that it gives the person serving the chance to have her or his heart touched by fire. That the service experience enhances the self-knowledge and character and identity of the one privileged to serve.
Yeah.
And we've seen that, of course, in so many different forms of service. You've identified the inner journey in the book as critical to the development of long-term and lifelong leadership. And you talked about character and crucible and purpose being core to the inner journey of the leader. Would you say a little bit about maybe each of them? What does it mean to say, cultivate and develop your character? How do you understand the crucible or the challenge that so many face from which they develop their sense of purpose? And then why is purpose important?
Yeah, well, here we get now turn to Joseph Campbell and the leader's journey. The Hero's Journey was the name of the original book, and now there's a book, Heroine's Journey, as well. And it was a recognition of the idea about the hero's journey from Joseph Campbell was that if you look at societies across time and across space, they have narrative stories about the development of the country or whatever, and they search for a narrative. And what we know about leadership more generally now is that the best leaders do come through a journey. Leaders, you just are not born as a great leader or a successful leader. You may have some leadership traits that will make it more likely that you'll succeed as a leader, but you're not there. You have a long way to go to get there. It takes time, it takes perseverance. What we know is that, well, let me give you an example. When I first went to Washington, I went in a naval uniform to finish off a hitch there. And I wound up going at a very young age to work for Richard Nixon, whom I knew very little about because I voted for Hubert Humphrey. But they asked me at the Nixon thing, would you come in? So, and I did. And what I found was, in Nixon, fascinating man, he was the brightest, the best strategist I've ever seen in public life. He and Kissinger together really did think through how the world was evolving and where the United States could make a big difference. And that's why Henry went to Beijing. That was all, and splitting the Russians and the Chinese apart. And that was a highly successful move. It helped to hasten the end of the Cold War. It built upon a lot of the successes of Democrats in preceding years. But nonetheless, it was successful. Had that been all there was to Richard Nixon, he would have gone down in history as a reasonably good president, maybe a second-tier president, which would have been a big deal. Unfortunately, sadly for him and for the country, he had demons inside himself that he had never learned to control. And they eventually brought him down. He was interviewed by David Frost of the BBC, and he asked Frost, Frost asked him, what happened? Why Watergate? What happened? And Nixon said, I gave my enemies a sword, and then they ran me through. And that really, spot on. That's spot on. He had gained self-recognition. But leadership, we now believe, starts with, and you can read Peter Drucker, you can read a lot of it, you can read Warren Bennis, some of the great figures in the field. And what they point out to you is that in the beginning, if you want to be on the road to successful leadership, the first thing you have to do is be self-reflective and come to understand who you are, what your values are, where your true north is, where what matters to you. You've got to sort of figure. Can you hear this? Yeah. You've got to be able to figure that out. So, but once you can figure out who you are and what your weaknesses are, you've got to have to decide what to do about it. And you've got to engage and be willing to not only have self-reflection, but self-awareness, but self-mastery. It's really important to achieve this self-mastery. Nixon had not. Whereas, and for a while, for a wholly different set of reasons, Bill Clinton didn't, but he overcame it. You can't overcome it. But what you find is what usually works in terms of having self-mastery of your own temperament, your own journey, is that you are a person of character. You are a person of passion. But the character becomes much, much more important. I would warn that no society has fully realized the promises of leadership. That a lot of work has been done over the years, especially there was a woman named Barbara Tuchman, Tuchman. She's a wonderful historian, no longer with us. Jessica, her daughter, ran the World Peace Institute, as I recall. But anyway, really interesting. And Barbara Tuchman was one of these people who examined different civilizations, and she was asking the question, which one succeeded in producing great leaders? That was her thrust, and she writes an epilogue about it, in which she says, she examines 4 or 5 civilizations. She said, we haven't had one yet that was completely successful. Almost every civilization we built eventually eroded or went south. And so she said, given everything we know, what's the one thing that would be most helpful to instill in our population, to instill among our citizenry? And she said, character. Personal character. Again and again, it means so much to the success of leadership. People, if they can trust you, if you're transparent, if you've got enough sort of self-control that you're open to telling people the truth, that what you believe on Monday and Wednesday and Friday is also going to be true of what you believe on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. That you're going to have a certain steadiness of purpose, that you do have values, and you guide yourself by those values. Ray Dalio trying to remember the name of the company, Bridgewater, has a book out on, and it's comes down very strongly on the side of character.
You yourself, as a writer, are quite modest because there's not much that's self-referential. You don't tell a lot of stories about yourself, what you did or what you thought. You help us learn about leadership and attract ourselves to it through the stories and the intellectual framework.
Yeah.
But once or twice you slip in and give us a wonderfully revealing story. And the one that you told that maybe forged your character in part was about your working in North Carolina through a program that Terry Sanford had then established, I think, that was where you tried to go out to have some contribution to racial reconciliation and healing. And would you give the audience just a sense of that? They might not have heard that story about your life.
I hope I haven't repeated it too many times. Let me give you two quick stories, if I might. I'll start somewhere else. One of the things you have to do when you're in your 20s and 30s, as you gain a sense of character and values and so forth, is who do you want to be when you grow up? What kind of person do you want to be when you grow up? And I decided early on I want to be a baseball player. A professional baseball player. I was tall, I was lanky. I used to pitch for Pony League and Little League or whatever. And I was pretty good at it, actually, for about 6 months. I was pretty good at it for a while. And then between junior high school and high school, I grew up about 6 inches. I just went like this. And I lost control. I lost my coordination. It wasn't terrific to start with, but it got even worse. So I decided to go out for the baseball team anyway. And we held our first practice in the gym, and because it was raining outdoors. So I went in there with a catcher, and we went back and forth for a few pitches. And then I threw a ball that I completely lost control of. The ball flew out of my hands and went through a window. That wasn't the worst of it. It went through a window on the second floor. And I realized then there ain't no way. I need to find another line of work, which I started looking for. So, but I did find, and I try to tell young people today, some of the best jobs in public life today, especially now we have so much polarization. Some of the worst jobs we have are in public life and at the national level, and we've got to change a lot of things to make that more attractive, and national service is part of that. But but there is still much to be gained by. And I tell my students that unless you have a terrific job waiting for you in Washington, don't go to Washington. Go to the state capitol. Go to the mayor's office. That's where the action is. That's where things happen on the ground. That's when big mistakes are made in government frequently and things fail. And that's where occasionally you get some real, some triumphs. But that's where the action is. And I found that in the civil rights period in the early 1960s, it was 1963. Remember Schwerner and Cheney, these 3 guys from Mississippi? They went to Mississippi, I think from New York, and they were captured and tortured and murdered, and left to die in a ditch somewhere. There was that shadow hanging over things here in North Carolina, and Terry Sanford was our Jack Kennedy. He was very charismatic. He inspired a lot of young people to get into public life. And he inspired me to go work for him on as you call it, the North Carolina Good Neighbor Council, which was an effort to go to about 15 different cities across the state, and in each one to create a council of leading blacks and leading whites to work together on jobs and education, and also to keep the peace. So we just didn't explode as a state. And I went to work for the guy who was the director of the Good Neighbor Council, and he was a wonderful mentor over the years, and named David Gergen. He was a segregationist for most of his life, and then he converted, and he became a really staunch integrationist. And I learned a lot from working for him. But and as part of the learning process, I heard about a big Klan rally that was being sponsored in the western part of the state. And that's where the Klan stronghold is in North Carolina. And I got together with 3 other high school friends from high school. We were all in college by this time. And we decided to go to this Klan rally together, the 4 of us. Probably one of the most reckless things I've ever done. We drove into where the field was around the rally, and there were a whole lot of cops. But as soon as you got inside the gates, in effect, the cops left. The law and order people left, and we were left with KKK brown shirts. Big, burly guys. And we had one of my friends on the trip had brought a tape recorder because he was a pastor for a black church, and they wanted to come back and help the black people in the black church understand the Klan and feel more comfortable with it, how to live with the Klan in effect. But anyway, I hadn't realized just how dangerous a mission would be. So we were there, and suddenly we were surrounded by a small group, and we went back to our car to get ready to go. And there must have been 300 people there surrounding the car and yelling at us, screaming at us that they were going to make sure we never came back to another rally, so forth and so on. And, I frankly thought we were going to get killed. I didn't see. So we got the driver in. I was sitting riding shotgun, and I said, look, just turn on the ignition and let's go. Very, very slowly, but let's get the hell out of here. And we've got to do it in a way we don't run over anybody, but we got to make sure that we get out. And by this time they were dancing on the roofs, they were banging on the windows, and one thing. We got to the highway and then took off, and then we had a chase with these KKK people for several miles in a dark night. And it was like, this is really strong stuff, and why I think service can run the gamut of being really, refreshing, but hard work and dangerous. But from that comes a sort of moral enrichment and a sense of we can make a difference. We don't have to accept life as it is here now. We don't have to accept the climate change as it is. We don't have to accept the inequities we see on pay in so many different ways. I just learned in the process of this with the GI Bill, for example. When the GI Bill came, I've always sworn by the GI Bill. And then I realized I didn't give it to blacks. I didn't know that. I mean, it's stunning. But there's stuff like that. We've still got so much to do. And I do think that as I look back on some of the individuals I've known, as people, there are a lot of good people in the press. I thought, Jim Lehrer happened to be a mentor of mine, and Judy Woodruff was. There were a lot of Ted Koppel. You could name a lot of people in that generation. I thought were terrific, and we need a whole new generation of people in journalism, frankly, to overcome it and get people who are true journalists and not people who are Zot's kind of journalism.
So one more question, then I'll open it up. You heard David reflecting on the inner journey, and then there's the outer journey for leadership, which the book also covers. And think of it, I guess, in my words, as the will and the skill.
Yes.
And you need them both.
Yeah, good. So I like that, the will and the skill.
So
this will be in your book, right?
Footnoting David Gergen, I promise.
Yeah.
So how do you think about the journey to develop the skill, the outer journey? That's hard too. That takes work.
It does. It takes a whale of a lot of work, but it's actually, I think on those things, on developing skills, it's a good thing to start early. Just get used to it. I've been reading a new book by Andrew Roberts called Churchill, Man of Destiny. And it's a wonderful book. It's also about 900 pages long. It's a great doorstopper. But in any event, Churchill wrote an essay called The Scaffolding of Rhetoric. Like he's 17 years old, 18 years old. Yeah. And he worked on it all his life, how to improve the quality of persuasion, the quality of giving a talk that would motivate. And a lot of people dismiss that, and they don't think it's an important part. If you're around Joe Biden these days, the one thing you would tell him is learn to give a better speech. That will really help you a lot more. Rhetoric has not gone out of style. It is rather, it demands more of us.
When I read, there's a sequence of chapters on the outer journey where David writes about sort of building your following, basically, I think is the way you put it. I'll use the words invest others in the opportunity to be a team.
Yeah.
You have a part about executing effectively. So, you have to be good at it, has to be organized to be effective, you have to carry out your action plan. And then you had a chapter on achieving purpose.
Right.
Of course, that means you have to be a goal setter to begin with in order to be able to pursue a purpose. And as I was reading those 3 chapters, it dawned on me from all of the years I spent working with Teach for America that what you wrote is exactly how they train. Our fellows. We teach them to, A, get the class invested in a big goal the class will learn, B, execute effectively lesson after lesson so you can chart the growth, and then C, achieve that purpose and bring the group together to know that they are the team that did it. And it just sort of was a marvel to me that you captured that across a big scope of leadership, and it could be applied in many circumstances.
Well, listen, what I did, there's nothing compared to, say, what Wendy Kopp did with Teach for America, because that program of leadership development, which she committed herself to early on, was the heart and soul of what made it run for a long time. And now she's become much more international. I do think there's one other element that you and I just talked about a while back, and that is what happens to so many people on the road on the journey toward leadership is they get upended along the way somewhere. They're defeated, things go badly, something's corrupt, you get hit in ways you don't anticipate. You go through your crucible moments, as they're called, and crucibles are they present the biggest kind of adversity you can have, because the road back is so hard, so difficult. Now, in that case, there's a lot of work that's been done by a fellow out of Case Western on the different stages of when people go through crucible events. Crucibles when you just take a hard blow, and it looks like you're finished, and you go down. And then the question is, what happens? And the research shows that about a third of the people who go through crucibles never recover. There's another third or so of people who struggle, and after a year or so are back to about where they were when the crucible hit. But then there's this third group, which is really the most interesting group, who have the resilience to come back. But as they come back, they acquire a moral purpose in what they do. A Reagan would say, not fully in jest, that after John Hinckley shot him, and it looked like he might die, he said, I give the rest of my life to God. That's what often happens with people who come out of crucibles with this sort of inner strength. And it's really tough to do, but some people do it. My portrait and profile in that section, among others, is on Katherine Graham. She happened to be someone I was friendly with and adored. But I went through Watergate on the other side of the aisle from where Katherine was at the Washington Post. But here's what was the critical part of it. Katherine was basically a stay-home mom for 5 children, and that's where she thought her future was going to be. And she was married to a guy who was really his mood swings were unbelievably big. In any event, and she couldn't control that, and eventually he committed suicide. He was locked away. He persuaded the people who locked him up that he'd been in there for a while, and everything was fine. Could he go back to the farm and spend a weekend? And they said, yes, you can come back and spend a weekend. He went there. Kay was there downstairs. They're having a nap together. He went downstairs. Next thing she hears a huge bang. And she rushes down, and he's dead. Now, she was under a lot of advice to sell the Post because she had no background in the Post. And, you ought to just get out of there. But Warren Buffett, among others, persuaded her to stay and make a fight for it, to become a real publisher, in effect. And that's what she did. And the Washington Post became a much, much better newspaper because this woman had gone through such hell and had come out the other side, with everybody feeling like she was an iconic figure. And there was about Kay Graham, something about her that inspired a sense of bipartisanship. When you got an invitation to go visit her for a reception or something like that at her house, it was a command performance, you had to go. But when you got there, what you found was there were a lot of people there who didn't look like you and were on the other side of the aisle. And that was part of the magic of it, of her leadership, was that she can inspire people in this journey that she'd just taken, which was, it was a stunning journey. But we do see this in individuals. You have to say, so far what we've been seeing from Zelensky is very much like that. We need to keep in mind, I keep asking myself, where are our Zelenskys? Where are our Zelenskys?
So let's open it up. I think we have mics on both sides. We'll start here, then we'll go here, and then we'll go there. So I've got 1, 2, 3.
And then we're going to have breakfast.
And then they promised, though, short questions, short answers, lots of momentum.
Okay.
Okay, does this work?
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, David. So it's not on. It's on. Okay. The evolution from the great man to the adaptive teams. And it seems it's now evolved to tribes that seem maladaptive. And so where does it go from here? Have we been here before, and how do we get out of it? Where it's going?
Good question.
That's a great question. I don't think we know how we're going to get out of it. I don't think we know how to get out of it. We don't know for sure. But I do think in finding a new president, I hope that the conversation will be open enough that we're going to elect somebody who's going to have a chance to govern, whoever it is who gets elected, that there's enough goodwill. I don't think we're ever going to, that's why I think the next few years are going to be so rough. I just don't see the makings of a new governance. What I hope is in the next 5 years or so, we can pass the torch to a new generation. And I think that new generation, it's Jefferson once wrote a letter saying basically there are times you have to entrust the next generation. You can't be sure they're going to succeed. You have to just entrust and take it on faith. And that's where sort of what I'm coming from now. I think there is a quality about within the country so far. We've had now a couple of times we've had impeachments, near impeachment, plus we had Watergate and all the rest of it. And none of that has overthrown the Constitution. None of that has left us with a sense that the Constitution is totally broken and so forth. It has left us with a sense it's a close call. But I think we still have to give it another. We shouldn't give up on democracy without another couple, 2 or 3 tries. I hope we never give it up, but I think we ought to be committed to hang in there for at least 2 or 3 different trials.
Thank you. Let's go to this one. Rob?
David and Dan, you've both discussed numerous leaders, both past and present. David, you're clearly a leader. You've written a book about leadership. I can also tell you're quite a humble man. When you think forward and others, whether it's that frog you picked up in the forest or others that know you, how do you hope they describe your legacy as a leader in the future?
Well, I hope they don't find out all the truth. Yeah. I've been trying sort of over the years to begin to focus in more instead of being so scattered. And I really do now, I've really committed myself to working with the younger generation and trying to build some bridges between the older and the younger generation. I think this generational thing is really important. And we're going to blow it if we sit here and let all these people go through the process and come out and all they care about is drinking beer. I mean, we got to have something higher we're aiming for as a society. And I'd like to be associated with that, but as a part of a bigger effort, because I do think it's going to take a lot of good folks. But go back and read about the Second World War generation. They were the ones in charge when I got there. Completely different approach to living together. It really helped to have a Saltonstall from Massachusetts saluting a Polish kid from Brooklyn. It made a big difference to have that, and bringing people here. The World War II leaders. And by the way, they also had something else that leaders really like, and that's humor. There are really good leaders tend to have a sense of humor. One quick little story, if you don't mind. So I used to pal around with Pierre Salinger, who was John F. Kennedy's press secretary. And he used to tell the story being in his office one day at about 11 o'clock. The phone rang, picked it up. It's the president. The president says, "Pierre, come in here. I need to talk to you." So he walks in. "Pierre, I know you love a good cigar just as much as I do." "Yes, sir, Mr. President." "Well, Pierre, I have a favor to ask." "What's that, Mr. President?" Pierre, I need you to get me some of Havana's finest cigars. Mr. President, that's going to be tough. How many do you need and how soon? I need 1,000, and I need them by tomorrow morning. Mr. President, I can't. President, I know you're a good man. See you later. 11 o'clock the next morning, phone rings. Pierre, come in here. You walked in. Pierre, did you get those cigars? Yes, sir, Mr. President, I'll have here 1,000 Havana's finest. I knew you're a good man, Pierre. See you later. 1 hour later, noon sharp, the President of the United States went on television to declare a trade embargo against Cuba. There's a fellow with a sense of humor.
Next question here.
How great a threat do you see technology and specifically social media to democracy?
You're more. I'm one of the last people to answer that question. I believe that what we're learning is that the internet is a double-edged sword. There are many things that come out of the internet that you can only celebrate. It has given access to a national discourse to millions of people who otherwise would feel shut out. And there are a lot of things about the internet, but the stream of vitriol that's now going through and the stream of disinformation, I think is exceedingly dangerous to the country. I mean, when it's this easy to get 35% of a party to believe that Trump, was denied presidency under everything was illegal against him, it's unbelievable. I mean, the disinformation could persuade that many people, and so in general. We ought to be figuring out ways we can control the worst parts of the internet and still not lose its vitality and its accessibility. And we simply haven't found the answer to that yet. It may be that we can, we'll get one soon, but right now I think we're floundering right now on that. And every indication is that it's just gotten worse in the last 3 months, not better.
Next question, right here on the left.
A lot of people in the country are tired of the far left and the far right.
Yes.
And Nancy Jacobson from the NoLabels.org and the Problem Solvers Caucus is about to try to form a new party. And I think Andrew Yang and Christy Whitman have also been trying. Can you comment on this new brand of leadership of unity?
I heard Christy Whitman, but I didn't know who else.
Andrew Yang.
Andrew Yang.
Andrew Yang. This was to form a third party, in effect. It's in effect a third party. Well, I have to, let's be fair, but I think Christy Whitman has been a wonderful public servant over the years. And if there's anybody who could get this done, it's probably Christy Whitman. But I'm afraid that it's much harder than it looks. When we went through a process like this a few years ago for another presidential election, we got entries gained in all the states. We opened it up so people could run pretty easily. We couldn't find, and I was on the sidelines for this, nobody could find a team who would stand up and do it, take the presidency and the vice presidency. There was no one on a group of about 30 who was willing to do that. So I think you have to be somewhat wary of making. I think we ought to hear more about it. We ought to test the waters. We ought to put flags up and so forth and so on. But I doubt it's the answer. I do think we're going to need. I think the most likely kind of person is going to be a person who is charismatic, who brings a great team, and has really firm convictions and passions about life. And you may have to get there piece by piece by piece. But Lincoln understood that, and he never would have succeeded had he not gone piece by piece. And Washington was the same way, and FDR was, well, that's a different story, but nonetheless, this is doable. But it's going to, and maybe there's a role here for the Aspen Institute to play about, and I think especially after the midterms, we'll have a clearer idea of what the political system and what the political traffic will bear. If there are a lot of upsets, Democrats pull off some upsets on abortion and on guns and these other issues, that's going to change the political dynamic and make it more possible to do something, I think, in the general.
one of the many great things you've done, just a comment, not a question, is you've supported veterans, both R&D and independents running for office. And that's comes out of your commitment, I believe, to encouraging public service and respect for character.
We have these people coming back now. They remind me so much of the World War II generation. These young people who have put on uniforms and went to Iraq and went to Afghanistan. They put themselves on the line for godforsaken wars. It's a tribute to them and to the kinds of people this country can still manage to raise and promote. That there are young people coming back now and working together. What we just heard about, the third party effort. Well, there's a group called With Honor. I happen to be the chair of the advisory board, but there are some Marines who got together to identify, select, and then offer training to and fundraising help to veterans coming back who want to run for a public office, whether it be in the House of Representatives or in the State House or somewhere else in the City Hall. If you want to get started on this, here's an organization that will help you and put some money in. And we have a growing number of people who have been veterans who've also been in public service. Like John Warner was before he died was deeply involved in all of this. I think that's one way. One of the things that gives me encouragement is these young people coming back, the young military veterans coming back, because they did put their life on the line. Seth Moulton, who happens to be someone I've mentored over the years, and he's had ups and downs with this, but he had 3 tours in Iraq in very serious danger. Came home as a Marine, had taken off his uniform, was going to go to the law school and come to the Kennedy School all ready to go when he got a call from David Petraeus saying, Seth, you worked for me before in Iraq. The president wants a surge. Would you put your uniform back on? Now, here's a kid who cleared everything. He made all the kind of commitments you could make. And he said, of course, because we didn't finish the job. And, that moved me. But we have people like that. The urgency that so many veterans brought to Afghanistan and the way we came out of Afghanistan, which was I think really immoral the way we came out, leaving so many people behind. But the fact that so many young veterans wanted to go and turn it around, and we've got people in Ukraine now who want to go turn it around. We got to be careful we just don't get some sharpshooters who are doing all this. But by and large, in the younger generation. There's a real surge of patriotism. Patriotism as they define it, and I'm not trying to argue they're the majority of people. It's hard to know just how many people are involved, but there is no question that there is a surge of interest and commitment to trying to make this a better country. There's so many people. Some people are exhausted and angry, but some people say, that's not a reason to retreat. That's a reason to rally and go after it. And that's where I think that's where the test is for a lot of us too who are older.
David, thank you so much for being here. Hearts touched with fire.
That's fun. I love it.
David will be going into the back lobby where he'll be available to sign books, and so Crystal can help escort David back so that we can start that part of the program. Thank you all.
Yeah. Quite well.
Wonderful.
That was fun.